Hello, I'm here today with Dr. Hussein Ahdieh, and we're here to have a conversation about his forthcoming book about Tahirih. Tahirih, the heroine of the Baha'i faith, and truly a very important figure in 19th century history that continues to have a legacy today. So welcome, it's so nice to talk with you today.
Thank you, dear. I always loved history, and I have collected material on the life of Tahirih for many years. So this finally is coming to an end. My good friend Hilary Chapman and myself, we just finished writing a book about her, and will be published soon. And this conversation or this interview, hopefully we use part of the documentary that we're also producing about her life.
I see. And what is it about Tahirih that has drawn you to her?
Tahirih is quite an interesting woman in the Persian history and in the Baha'i faith. She was born right at the time that the Babi faith started, and she managed to play a significant role in propagation and teaching of Babi faith. I came across a statement by the Bab, which perhaps we can talk about it later, that out of the 18th apostle that he believed in him at the very beginning,
Yes.
she is the one who never met him, but then her station and her knowledge is equivalent to all of them together.
Really? I haven't heard that before.
This is quite unbelievable and significant, because many people, for example, believe that the Qudus was the 18th letter of living, was the one that was really played a significant role, and there is even a mention that when they talk about Qudus station, that there was, if a moment delay was happening, Bab declaring his mission, Qudus would have done so. So this was how important his station was. But then Bab to make the statement that all these people, including Qudus, are equivalent to this woman is unbelievable. So when you come across a material like this, you feel like that you're almost obliged to introduce her to as wide audience as possible. And I was fortunate that I come from the same country, Persia. I know Persian language, I know some Arabic, and then of course I learned poor English while I'm here. So with the help of Hilary Chapman, we were able to put this book together, and it's going to be a great contribution to Baha'i literature and world literature as well.
Well, before we continue, I just want to make sure so everyone understands exactly what you are talking about. Two questions. One, what year was Tahirih born?
Tahirih was born in 1817.
Okay.
We are not 100% sure, because we have to remember, those days they were not keeping record of the birth date and things like this. But her birthday was written, as I think was tradition also in the West, in the back of a Quran, and unfortunately that particular Quran that contained her exact birthday, as well as many other material that she was written, was burned after she died. The idea was that they wanted to destroy as much material about her as possible. And what we do know from Abu Baha's writing, from Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of our faith, that they indicate that the year of her birth was 1817, the same year actually that Baha'u'llah was born.
Yes, and I understand that really is the beginning of the Baha'i faith. I heard you also mention the Babi faith, and I just want to make sure that everyone listening is clear. So what is the Babi faith versus the Baha'i faith?
Okay. Let me go back a little bit. After Prophet Muhammad died, there was a division took place among the Muslims. A good number of them, they follow a man by name Abu Bakr, who was the first Khalif, but there were a minority of the Muslims who believed really his son-in-law Ali should have replaced him. So that division started right after Muhammad's ascension. But then later on, in following Ali's death, there was a series of holy men, they called themselves Imam, that came on the scene. The 12th one somehow disappeared or died, whatever, and the notion was that at the end of time he would return, and the title they gave him was the Qa'im. So Bab, which means the gate, he claimed to be the Qa'im, or the promised one, that the Muslim, especially the Shia Muslim,
yes,
they were expecting. His announcement and his declaration in 1844 set a major upheaval in the Islamic world. Because the control of Persia and part of Afghanistan, Iraq, was very much in the hand of the mullahs and mujtahids and religious leaders. And by coming and saying that I am the Qa'im, I am the promised one, basically he was saying that there is no more need for these mullahs and mujtahid, because they were representing me among you. Now that I'm here, we can forget about them. That, I have a feeling that that was the main reason that they objected to his call, and eventually they put him to death. Now, Tahirih, of course, was one of his first early believers. He had 18 persons who believed after him at the beginning. 17 of them were men, and one was this woman. Tahirih never met Bab. Rest of them did. What happened is she had a dream. You have to remember that these people were all expecting that something is going to happen. Otherwise, the glad tidings was in the air, was around the corner. So they've been reading about it. They've been attending this school that called Sheikhi school, Sayyid Kazim and Sheikh Ahmad, who promise that they are coming soon. So in one night, Tahirih had a dream, and he dreamed of this young man with a black cloak and a green turban, high above the sky, was reciting some lines. And being a clever woman and all that, somehow she managed to write a couple of those lines on a paper, or next morning when she remembered. And later on, a group of followers of Sayyid Kazim, they began their search for the Bab, the promised one, and led by a fellow named Mullah Hussein. I'm sorry if I mention all these names, but it's part of history. I cannot help it. So
well, maybe we'll have time later to find out who all these people are. There's a lot of important people you're talking about.
True.
Okay.
Tahirih gave a letter or a note to one of these people who were searching for the Qa'im, and casually probably she told him, if you ever met the promised one, please convey my humble love and my acceptance of his cause, and gave him a letter to give it to him. Later on, an answer came to her from Bab, and a book by him was received. And to her amazement, she found those few lines that she dreams that particular night in the book. This, of course, confirmed her belief. At the same time, most likely, she received an answer from Bab accepting her as one of her apostles, and that's how she became Babi.
And you said this was very early on, so was this 1844, 1845?
I would say it was
also?
1844, 1845,
okay,
very early. At that time, probably she was, let's say, if she was born 1817, she was maybe in her 20s,
yes,
or early 30s. Now, Babi dispensation lasted a short, because you asked earlier what was Bab and
yes,
what's his dispensation. Dispensation, I mean his faith, religion. This is a sort of Baha'i language we're using. Lasted a short time, because he himself indicated that a greater one is coming, and he referred to him as Man Yasrullah, the one that God would make his appearance eminent, something to this effect. Mm-hmm. So
I think I've heard him whom God shall make manifest, right?
Shall God make manifest, yeah. Or, and of course, us as a Baha'i believe that was Baha'u'llah. No, the teaching and the writing of the Bab is was fitted for the time that he made his declaration, 1844. When Baha'u'llah made his declaration, he kept some of those laws, but he got away from most of them. And this was also the word of Bab himself, that these laws and this principle I'm bringing is up to him to either accept or reject. Faith lasted short time. Baha'u'llah came on the scene. Majority of the Babis became Baha'i, but a good number of them just left the faith, or they never joined the Baha'i faith.
So one thing that attracts me to Tahirih, I think, is I see her as a bit of a rebel and her rebelliousness. So I'm just curious for you to tell me, when she did recognize the Bab and she became a Babi, did her family follow her into that religion?
She's a very unusual woman. As I mentioned, her marriage did not last. She left her husband.
She left her husband.
She left her husband. Which is very unusual in Islamic world, because you don't do this. The husband could leave you and marry many other women, but a woman would never do that. It was unheard of. She left Qazvin and she went to Karbala, which was a holy city in Iraq. And from very beginning, especially after she became Babi, her approach was, you cannot be wishy-washy anymore. You cut with the past. A new faith has come, a new dispensation has started. And some of these Babis and some of her friends and colleagues were trying to go slow even, but they said she was not the type to go for that. All her writing and her poetry shows that she believed that the new day has started and we have to get away from the past. This spirit of, as you said, rebellious spirit of hers, it shows throughout her life, through her poetry, through her writing, and we could talk more later about her poetry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm curious, this is backtracking a bit, but you were talking about throughout her life. I mean, what was her childhood like, or how was she raised that she was even this educated in the first place to even
her family,
write these things?
Her parents, especially even her mother. Oh, by the way, Tahirih was very beautiful, extremely beautiful, and is often when they write about her, they all admire her beauty, and non-Baha'i historian, Baha'i historian has testified to that.
Okay. And
of course, the concept of beauty at that point was beautiful black hair, round face, maybe a little bit of weight here and there. She loves to eat, and her father started a school in their town, and it seems that it also shows that the family were a little bit different. They set up a section in that school for education of the girls, that her mother was teaching courses, very basic courses for the girl up to age 12, 13, before they married. She used her cousin library extensively. Lots of books were there, and she studied there extensively. She married, as I said, 14, and then of course when she moved to Karbala, she right around the time that the great master Sayyid Qasim died, and it's amazing, this young woman quickly replaced him. So you have these hundreds of these mullahs, young religious leaders. They would all come to listen to her. Now, the way that she was conducting the lesson in Karbala was interesting too. She would always sit behind a curtain, because you're not supposed to see a face of a woman. And all the debate and all the question and discussion was happening while she was sitting there, and the audience were out there, the other side of the curtain, asking questions.
Now, were most women of her class, because she was of a fairly high-to-do class, is that right?
Yes.
Were most women of her class even literate at this time? What was the standard education for women?
I think it seems that her good number of her family members, herself, her sister Marzieh, her mother, and number of others, they were all the educated member of society at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, in general, 99% of the women of Persia at that time, they were illiterate. A very small percentage. There were few number of women in the king's court who have written some poetry and material, but really you cannot find much evidence of women pursuing their education.
It does seem somehow shocking for me even to imagine a group of male clerics listening to her. I mean, it's quite astounding.
It's quite unusual, and lots of them were quite unhappy.
Okay.
But then, and they complained to Bob actually about her style of life and the way she was teaching and the way she was doing her things. And then a very strong letter came from Bob, a tablet, and referred to her. This was one of the first time that Bob referred to her as Tahirih, the pure one. That see, for this average Babis or Muslims and others, the idea that the woman even can talk in public, the idea of woman that can recite verses from Quran and do all this teaching activity was blasphemous. So they were always complaining, she's doing that, but then at the same time, it's interesting that the group of men and some women, they have their name, they actually became attached to her, not necessarily Bob. You have to remember that at the time of the Bob, there was not much communication happening between Bob and his disciples, or even his major disciples. So some folks like Tahirih, like Wahid, like Mullah Hussein, like Quddus, they were the one who were carrying the show. They would have some idea of Bob's writing, but they were the one who really doing all the teaching, or conducting all the campaigns and all that. So this group of people who were around Tahirih, they called themselves Qurratiyeh. That came from her name, Qurratul Ain.
Oh.
And it's amazing. There was a whole movement of people. Some people call themselves Babi. These people call themselves, otherwise they believe Tahirih was the return of Fatima, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, and whatever she say, whatever she does, is the word of God. And this again caused lots of problem, even among the Babis, because they didn't like her style. They would ask for debate, they asked for question and all that. And one thing she did in a couple of occasions, which is quite interesting and unusual for a woman again, there's a tradition in Islam called mubahala. Good luck, find out how to spell that.
You'll have to tell us
mubahala.
later.
It means that you and your opponent sit and discuss a point, and you cannot convince each other, so you leave it to God, and the wrath of God would kill the person who is wrong. This was very harsh. That's the way to do it. You cannot resolve the issue, God would kill the person. So anytime there was some problem, she would ask for that. You say, you don't agree with me? Let's do mubahala. And of course, these people were always afraid that she might be right, so they would not get involved in this confrontation things. Another thing she did, which I thought was very cute, they were objecting to Bob's writing and her writing, because it seemed that Bob and Tahirih both, they were very artistic. And sometimes they use red pen to do the writing. And the traditional color was always black. So one of the things they would pick on her and Bob's writing that is so unbecoming, this color of red to blue writing. He said in one session, he's sitting with a bunch of mullahs, and they are debating the subject of validity of the cause and the grammars and all that. So he writes something in red quickly, and she writes something quickly in black, and gave the red page, a page with the red writing, to one of the mullah, and the mullah began to read it and then threw it on the side, and this is blasphemous, this kind of writing. Then she reminded him, these are the words of Muhammad in Quran. She
entrapped him.
Entrapped him, exactly, just to show that the color should not decide on what is right, what's wrong. What was your question? I forgot. I'm sorry. Her lifestyle?
Well, I'm interested in her lifestyle, and
yes.
I was just talking about the station of women being such as it was at that time in Iran. I was saying that it was hard for me even to imagine,
yes,
you know, her being this spiritual leader that all these men were you know, captivated listening to. And then I was thinking, I wondered if you could tell us, I was thinking of the conference of Badasht, which is a quite, you know, famous event in Baha'i history. And I was thinking of it when you mentioned how beautiful Tahirih was.
Yes.
And then I was thinking about, it's so interesting to talk about how beautiful a woman was in a time when men did not even see women, you know, unless they were related to them. So how would it even be known what she looked like?
That's a good.
And then I was thinking about Badasht, and of course the very famous incident when, you know, she removed her veil.
Yes, I think that. But one reason, that's a very good point. I never thought of that, because when they talk about other women, Persian women, 19th century, not many of them refer to their beauty, but when it comes to Tahirih, they often mention that she was beautiful. She was beautiful. Perhaps that was one of the few women they really have seen in real life, beside their mother and sisters. The life of women in Persia, and actually we wrote about this extensively in our book, to just give a background it was. I'm sorry to say that it was at the almost the level of treat them like animals or part of merchandise in your household. They had no respect. They had no right. They would grow up in their parents' house until 13, 14 years of age. Marriage is arranged. They would move to the husband's house. That most likely the husband had a number of other wives. So they become part of his little harem, or if his man was very rich, could be a couple hundred of those women. She was just there as a sex object often, or to do the cleaning and all that. So it's and it was not that much different in America either, by the way. So we talk about the Persia and Middle East being so bad. When you read the history of the woman in this country, when folks like Susan Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others asked for the woman's right, they had not much right either. Their role again was to be a mother in the house and to raise children, and they didn't have much higher education either. So Tahirih was really, Tahirih, and I'm sure there are some other women, they were a breaking point from the past. Now, just to move a little historically before I get to Badasht. So she spent a number of years in Karbala, caused lots of headache for lots of people. That was her. Wrote lots of letters, lots of poetry, and then eventually things become so bad that the instruction came from the Ottoman Empire, that she should leave the country. She moved from Karbala to Baghdad, stayed in Baghdad for a short time, then came back to Iran. Came back to Iran, and it's quite interesting. Again, I suggest you read the book to get more stories straight. He moved to the cities like Hamadan, Karan. These are all wonderful cities on the border of Iran and Iraq. And in all these cities, there were a great number of people who joined her movement and became Babi. And it's significant that while she was staying in Hamadan, some Jewish rabbi became Babi. And some of wonderful Jewish family that we have who became Baha'i are really from the time that Tahirih taught the faith in Hamadan. Her intention was to go to Tehran and to teach Muhammad Shah, the king of Persia, about the Babi faith. She was stopped.
She really had no sense of limitation.
She had no sense of limitation. It's very unusual. And actually, when she left Iraq and she came back to Iran, she was surrounded by 30 of her followers. Good number of them armed, just to protect her, because she was constantly in danger of somebody kill her. So imagine, it's stuff for movies, that this woman, and his stuff is written by non-Baha'i historians, so we know that when she entered Iran, she was surrounded by all this Arab and Persian men, some on horses, some on foot, that were protecting her as she was going from town to town. She returned back to her hometown, Qazvin. Of course, that silly husband of hers sent a message to her that if you apologize, I will take you back and come to our house, come to my house, because she moved to her father's house. And there's an answer from her that Martha Ruth talked about. I don't know where she got that. She sent a message to the husband. He said that you have failed me from very beginning. If you would have come to Karbala, and when I was traveling, would hold the
reins
of my horse as I'm traveling on foot, and may have forgiven you and returned to you, but our separation is permanent in this world and the next world. And of course, that even make him more mad. So she stayed in Qazvin, subject to lots of abuse by her family, especially her uncle, that in some occasion even struck her, poor woman. Something terrible happened in Qazvin. This is the interesting story. Her uncle, a leading mullah by the name Tahirih, was killed, was assassinated by a sheikhi who became Babi later. Because he was so arrogant and he was so vicious in his presentation in the mosque that this young man got so upset that he hid in the mosque late at night. In the morning, when Tahirih's uncle, came to pray, he approached him from the back and he stabbed them repeatedly with a knife. Of course, this created a great deal of upheaval in the city. Many Babis were arrested, many Babis were put to death, even though the killer came and confessed that he is the one who killed him, but they couldn't believe that only a single fellow could have done this, just an average person. They want to blame the whole community. Tahirih was put under the house arrest for more. With the help of Baha'u'llah, well, at that time, of course, he was known as Mirza Hussein Ahdieh, she escaped Qazvin, and that's also a very colorful story, the way she escaped at night. They brought some horses by the gate of the city. She had to climb down the ladder to escape from the window, got back in the horses, and went to Tehran, stayed in Tehran for a short time, and then went to Badasht for the conference.
And now would you tell us something about the conference of Badasht?
It's interesting that during the short break we had, you mentioned something about what was happening in America. But even though really I don't want to get involved in too detail about the American scene, because that requires a whole new interview and takes time to discuss the role of the woman in this country, because it's part of the book actually. It's a good part of the book. In 1848, while there was a great conference was taking place in Seneca Falls, which is north of New York City, attended by some of the leading reformers in America, exactly the same time that this conference was going on in America, a group of Babis, I think it was 81 of them, they got together in a village or in the open space area called Badasht. The conference was pretty much arranged by Mirza Hussein Ahdieh, which known as Baha'u'llah later. I'm sure Quddus and Tahirih were involved in planning aspect of it. And the idea was to really to get together and to evaluate the situation and to figure out where do we go from here. A sort of planning conference or action conference. And they had two items in their agenda. One was, at that point, Bob, the founder of Babi Faith, was in prison. And they were hoping in this conference they can plan how they can rescue him from the prison. And there were some who actually got pretty involved in the planning aspect of it, but Bob discouraged them. He did not want to go in that route. So the rescue of the Bob was gave up altogether. The other item in agenda was to review what is the Babi Faith, and as I said, where do we go from here? And it was in that occasion that the two schools of thought came to clearly crash. One was Quddus school, which was more conservative, more moderating, more easygoing. And the other one was led by Tahirih, who was more radical, and she wanted to break away from the past altogether. And this could be a stage confrontation, but I think there was some deeper friction already there. According to some historian, the plan for having this discussion and this debate was done by Baha'u'llah, Quddus, and Tahirih, and they wanted to see what would be the reaction of the other Babis that were participating. There is a tradition in Islam that if the woman make a theological mistake and make a claim or say something, because she's not that smart, she could be forgiven. And you would let her go. But if the man say the same thing, it's awful. You would put him to death. So the idea, some historians say that the reason that Tahirih was making this radical claim because she knew that they could not kill her, because eventually she would say, "I'm sorry," and they let her go. But others could not do it. So this, of course, is far-fetched. I don't think so. They went that far. But it's obvious that the Tahirih wanted to clearly show that a new faith has started. Bob's teaching has nothing to do with Islam. It's not extension of Islam. He has not come to reform Islam. He is not just the Imam, 12 Imam, Qa'im. He is a new prophet, is a new manifestation with new book. Then Quddus, of course, as I mentioned earlier, believed that we should go slower and all that. And the highlight of the conference happened that while the conference was going on, this charming woman put her best makeup on, and the story goes that there was in 2 occasions that she really used nice makeup to make herself even prettier than usual. One was in that occasion, and the other time was the day that they put her to death. Yes. And so she walks in the conference room without her face being covered. No, this was, these days, of course, it sounds silly to talk about that. But you have to put yourself in the context of the 19th century Persia, Islamic world, to have a only woman in the conference walking so we could see her face. And this is the end of the world. And actually, when I mention end of the world, there is a tradition, there's a hadith in Islam that Fatima, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, in the day of judgment or the end of the world, she will appear without the veil, without the covering her face. So there were some, of course, Babis who remember this hadith or tradition. They thought, okay, here comes Fatima. But then there were others who were shocked. And the story goes that one of them was so upset that he even cut his own throat because he felt guilty even seeing the face of a woman. And you can see that even these days with this, what's happening in Iran these days, and the way they force the woman to go back to the traditional clothing that they, what 150 years ago was even worse. The conference, I think, lasted 22 days. It was a number of meeting and discussion and all that. Eventually, they all came to some agreement, and they left the conference in a rather happy and joyous note. And they were singing songs, they were reading her poetry, and they left, and they went different ways. At the same time that the conference was going on, an instruction has come from Bab that all his followers should go to Khorasan, because there is a tradition again in Islam that at the time the Qa'im would lead his followers with the black standards on the march. And to fulfill that tradition, Mullah Hussein, I think followed by more than 300 of his Babis, they marched toward Mazandaran. Tahirih to continue the proclaiming of faith. They end up in the fortress called Tabarsi, and they were surrounded and attacked by the government soldiers. Tahirih was so anxious to join Quddus and Mullah Hussein in the battle of Tabarsi, she was even going to make herself look like a man to join them. Baha'u'llah stopped her, and most likely she would do it. She was a type that would do something like that. She was in Mazandaran for a while, and then eventually she was arrested and brought back to Tehran.
I'm assuming she did continue to wear the veil for the rest of her life after that day, right? Mm-hmm. It was just a one...
The question of she was wearing veil or not is debated by some historians. A good number of them believe that when she was, maybe perhaps after Badasht, when she was with the Babis, with the follower or her friend, she was not wearing the veil. But when she was with the mullahs and others, she would wear that. I think that probably most likely that's what happened.
And after she was, you said she was imprisoned?
Yes, after what happened was many Babis were put to death in Tabarsi's fortress. Many of them were arrested, and she was hiding in different towns and different homes for almost 2 years in Mazandaran, mostly supported by Baha'u'llah. And then eventually, in 1852, something horrible happened. A group of young Babis, quite stupid groups, they tried to kill the Shah, assassinating, and they were not successful because they were very amateurish the way they went to kill him. A whole new wave of persecution of the Babis started. Many of the leading Babis were put to death, including, at this point, of course, Tahirih was, I think, late 48, 49, that was brought to Tehran, was put under the house arrest in the mayor's house, Mahmud Kalantar, and in 1852 they put her to death after the attempt of the killing of the Shah.
And you said that was the second day, so the story goes that she had beautified herself.
Yes. The day that she was put to death, actually, and the way she was put to death is also not quite clear. But we have, from the writing of a French Orientalist called Nicholas, and also Professor Brown and a few others, some picture of what happened. They were so afraid that the Babis, especially after they tried to kill the Shah, they were afraid of Babis very much. So they wanted to put her to death quietly, because they knew if they wanted to do it daytime and things like this, she might be rescued by the other Babis. So the arrangement was made at night time. Some soldiers would come where she was. They would take her on horse to this garden outside the city gate, and the sort of a general was there, and we have information in the book, and surrounded by a few of his attendants. And one more time they asked her to recant her faith, which of course she refused. And it was in that occasion that I think you made a reference that she looks extremely beautiful that day. They took a kerchief that she had and they strangled her. Mm-hmm. And they threw her in a well, and they covered the well with the dirt and stones and all that. We know exactly where that location is at this point.
Have you been there?
No, I have not. No, but we have a picture of that place. It's so interesting when we mention Nicholas and Brown. Part of the book, just to show how much it was appreciated by the historian and by the scholars and others, I have collected good number of comments and writing, or at least make a reference to it, by the Western journalists and papers and writers and outing. They talk about Tahirih, which is really part of her legacy and part of her story.
And what is her legacy in Iran? I mean, to what degree is she known, both at the time of her life? I mean, was she actually known nationally? Was it such a revolution that she was known nationally, and then after her death?
She was known actually as a Babi. But nowadays, I think that in the 20th century, she is known more for her poetic ability than her religious belief. Of course, everyone knew that she was a Babi, but there's a whole collection of her poetry available. But then recently, some scholars began to search her work, and they are discovering that some of those poetry is not really hers, which is fine. You know, she had this great ability to recite poems from different sources, and she often repeat them. And what happened is that because she was so talented, she would even add her own stuff to the poem that was written by somebody else. So there are maybe some of the poem that shows first few lines is from her, then is a quote from somebody else. But of course she doesn't clearly indicate, okay, no, I'm going to continue to read his poetry. So what they have done, there are about, I would say, 40–50%, I'm just guessing, of her poetry is confirmed is hers. The rest belong to the other poet at the time or before. But her writing, which a great historian by the name Fazl Mazandarani has collected, is clearly hers, and shows number of prayers that she has written, a number of tablets, a number of letters and essays that we have. So in Iran, whenever they talk about the woman poets, or she is included in those, and we are very proud of that, of course.
And her poetry and her prose, is the subject matter almost exclusively about religion and the spirit, or
most
other things?
Most her poetry has a mystical element to it. Of course, it's lots of love and longing, typical Persian poetry. That's this. But it seems that during different period of her life, when you carefully study her poetry, she's saying different things. There are occasions, for example, after when she became Babi, you see so much joyful poetry by her. And then later on, you come across some few other work of hers, which shows how anxious and how desperate she is to meet Bab, her beloved, and to see him. And then later on, there are a whole bunch of poetry when she talks about the another person, and she kept mentioning Baha, Baha. And of course, nobody at that time knew what she's talking about. But the feeling is that she even anticipated and knew that there is another manifestation is in the making, and that would be Baha'u'llah. Her dream about Bab and things like this, it shows that she had this innate and intuitive knowledge and feeling, and it does manifest itself through her poetry very often.
Does your book include any poetry or any of her writings that have not been published previously?
Very much. What they have done, there are two professors, or there were at least, one of them unfortunately died recently, by the name Amin Banani and a fellow by the name Kessler, who are professor at the University of California. They translated many of her poetry. It's very difficult to translate poetry from one language to other language.
Right.
But it happened, this gentleman Kessler, he is a poet himself, and he's a great linguist, and he has done a great job in translating and Tahirih's poetry. So we use lots of his work, and that has not even been published before. He gave us permission to use them. And it's really the highlight of the book is this poetry that this man have done. Of course, Amin Banani was a great scholar. He did his contribution also.
Wonderful. And in what other ways, because really there is a lot of literature available about Tahirih, because she's so compelling to so many people, but what would you say is different about your book?
One is just this idea that Kessler has agreed that we use his translation. Professor Kessler, I should say, is a wonderful gentleman from, I think, Hungarian background, if I'm not mistaken. He does know many languages, and he has translated from Finnish, from Russian, from German to English. Because he's a poet himself, he does not translate Tahirih's poetry literally. He does the same thing that Fitzgerald did to Khayyam, that he get the essence of Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat, and he put in such a beautiful way in English that you really enjoy reading them. So this would be a wonderful part of the book that you will see. The other part that, as I said, we should discuss some other time, is that in 19th century, while Tahirih was making all this claim and creating all these waves and all that in Persia, there were a great movement in America, also sponsored and initiated by American women. And by that I mean the founder of the Christian Science movement, or the Shakers movement, or all the reformers like the Susan Anthony, or like Elizabeth Cady Stanton. These were significant women in 19th century in America. And what you get from the book is that it was really the spirit of the age. It was a divine movement started in 19th century. They knew something is in the air. Even among the men, when we read the story of Miller and his expectation that promised one would come in 1844 and people were going to the mountain waiting for him, or Joseph Smith and start the whole Mormon religion. So, and there were movement in Sudan, there were movement in Sweden, there were all over, that this expectation that the promised one is coming and the end time is at hand.
Sounds like a wonderful book, and I'm very excited to read it.
Good. Save your money.
Well, I will.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Sure. It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you. It was wonderful.
Thank you, dear.